Did Thomas Crapper really invent the toilet? How did Soviet-era famines give us Tony the Tiger? How did Sigmund Freud's nephew use bananas to start a 36-year civil war? You can learn all about these and hundreds of stories in my new book, Facts That Aren't True. Link in the description. I've actually had this concept fully developed for several months. I just never got around to making the video, so I'm going to do it now. I took all of the original Pokemon and I put them into taxonomic groups, and I created my own evolutionary tree for them. It's not the most detailed thing. You could get really into the details of the specific relationships and what's most closely related to what here. I didn't do all that, but I did the best I could. I'm sure there might be a few problems with this. Feel free to point them out. But here are some clarifications. First of all, this isn't Earth. So while most of the categories I have are categories for organisms that exist on Earth, some of them are not, but this doesn't take place on planet Earth, as far as I know. So I'm allowed to invent a completely different type of life. Another clarification is to make this work, I'm not constrained to the specific evolution of each Pokemon. You'll see where that really comes into play, especially when we go over the Arthropods. So for example, Caterpie and Butterfree, I don't have to say that they're directly related, and I don't. I'm also not constrained to the Pokemon timeline. Evolved Pokemon don't coexist. Or if they do coexist, one didn't evolve from the other. They're just very similar and they coexist at the same time. And the final clarification is I know literally nothing about the Pokemon canon, so the extent to which any of this might contradict any Pokemon canon about like what types of organisms they are or anything like that, I would just simply say that the canon is wrong. Again, here's the overall structure, and on the top right and the bottom right, we can see there are some kind of noticeable exceptions. They're not connected to anything. I'll explain why that is and how that works very early on. But as a quick overview, the protobiote is the most ancient life form. Plants are the next most ancient, and then the Cnidaria pop up over here. We can see by the branch there that branches off before anything else other than plants. Then the geoderms, that's the animal for which all other animals above it is the ancestor for. A key difference between this one and life on Earth would be that the amphibian branch doesn't derive from the fish branch. Amphibians are highly derived lobe-finned fishes, for example. We don't have any evidence of that in the Pokemon world, so these two share a root instead of one stemming from the other. However, the reptile, bird, and mammal stems, those do branch directly from the amphibian one. Okay, here we go. So the first one is the artificial. Now, these are all inorganic apart from Mewtwo. Mewtwo has some Mew DNA, but Mewtwo is not part of any actual biological taxon or clade, so it goes in with all of the machine type, completely abiotic, artificial Pokemon. Next are the plasma. So once again, the plasma are on their own down in the bottom right there. And that's because I couldn't think of any way that these could possibly fit. So what happened is the plasma Pokemon, they are a form of life that developed independently on whatever planet this is. They are biological, but they're not related to anything else. How did that happen? How the hell should I know? And for the record, Ghastly is the more ancient and Gengar is the most modern. Okay, now transitioning to things that are all related to other things. So Ditto, I'm going to call the kingdom of life that Ditto belongs to the protobiote. Ditto's the most primitive form of life on the Pokemon planet. It's not the very first Pokemon. I don't know. I think in the canon they say Mew is, but whatever, I'm ignoring that. The canon is incorrect. I'm correct. So Ditto's not the very first ever Pokemon, but it's the last remaining member of the most ancient kingdom from which all other forms of life derive. And those kingdoms, for the record here with Pokemon, are just protobiote, animal, and plant. That's all we have to work with. Okay, the plants. So this would have been the easiest category to describe except for execute. Why did they have to create execute? It makes this whole thing impossible. Now again, I don't have to put execute, which is a bunch of eggs, in the plant category. I said I don't have to do that. The problem is, it has no other characteristics. It's just a cluster of eggs. Now, if it's nothing other than a cluster of eggs, it can't be in relation to any particular Pokemon. It would have to be related to all birds and all reptiles, and then mammals could have just lost that trait over time, I guess, like what happened here on Earth. Now, I could have done that, but it would have been a mess. I couldn't have put it in any particular group. So instead, we're just going with this. In Pokemon world, plants lay eggs. And if you don't like that, remember, this isn't Earth. It doesn't matter. The evolution happened independently. The Cnidaria, so on planet Earth, Cnidaria, that's what we call things like jellyfish, and these are the most primitive form of animal life, and they are the most similar to Ditto. And Tentacruel is the most modern, and what the heck is this thing's name? Tangela, I don't know, sorry. That's the most ancient. Next we have the geoderms, and this one's really fun. These are very, very ancient, and they represent when protobiotes, this is an evolutionary milestone, they represent when protobiotes first began incorporating minerals from the environment into their bodies. And at first, it was just on the outside, like what we see with Coughing, Wheezing, Onyx, Geodude, and Graveler. But Golem is an interesting case. Golem formed one of the very first internal skeletons. Now, Golem would have been a perfect ancestor for Squirtle, but that won't work for reasons that I'll try to describe later. Wheezing and Coughing, they are able to fly because they trap gas that they produce from cellular respiration, because I say so. The Arthropods. So we don't have a missing link from Geoderms to Arthropods with the original 150 Pokemon, which in my world, on my planet, Planet Peterson, those are the only ones that count. Although I do love Togepi. So the Arthropods, they're a very diverse group, and the relations are nothing at all like what they are in this show. I tried to put Pokemon next to each other that are most closely related. Okay, so for example, Caterpie and Butterfree, they are not closely related. And that's because a caterpillar is not a different species than a butterfly. Okay, so Caterpie and Weedle, they are like myriapods or something like that, like millipedes and centipedes. So they are part of the same group. They are closely related to each other. That's why they are next to each other. Butterfree, Venomoth, Beedrill, Scyther, Kabuto, and Kabutops, they're all in the same category that I have not named. And Kabuto and Kabutops, they're the most ancient. And Kabuto's extinct because I say so. Now, the reason they are more ancient is because they have not yet developed flight, which all the other members have. Venomoth is the most modern of all the Pokemon in this group, and that's because it somehow developed 6 appendages, whereas all others, they only have 4. Venonat is some sort of like mite or something. I don't know. That's what we're going with. Metapod and Kakuna, they're an ancient extinct Pokemon who evolved very hard exoskeletons for some sort of reason. Nobody knows. The crabs, that doesn't really need any explaining. And Pinsir, whatever the hell Pinsir is, some sort of ancient, huge, angry copepod, maybe would be the closest thing based on how it looks. Next are the mollusks. So in the Pokemon world, mollusks and arthropods are the closest relatives to each other, as some of the mollusks, they also incorporate hard body parts, but not like onto their body, like not attached to their body, but just they sort of live symbiotically with them, like a shell, for example. Not all mollusks have shells. We have slugs and octopuses and cuttlefish. And Grimer and Muck are mollusks because I say so. Echinoderms, so they're still primitive, but they fully embrace the whole mineralized tissue on the outside, but not an arthropod because they have radial symmetry, which in Pokemon world somehow makes them more recent instead of more primitive. And that's because I already drew the diagram and I'm not swapping arthropods and echinoderms now. It's too late for that. Fish, nothing special to say here except Gyarados is not related to Magikarp, not directly related. That is, Magikarp's not an ancestor of Gyarados. He's his own badass type of fish that I don't have a name for. All fish in the Pokemon world are ray-finned, bony fishes with no transition to land creatures, which is a little bit unfortunate. Maybe in the extended Pokemon universe, they do have something like that. I don't know. Amphibians. Now, here's a very important step. We have the photofrogs, Bulbasaur, Ivysaur, Venusaur. Now, those are extremely unique animals in the Pokemon world, but there actually are photosynthetic animals here on planet Earth. For example, there are some nudibranchs that have trapped chloroplast in them. But the most important one is Chansey. Chansey is a transitional form. Chansey is a hard egg layer, which is why all of the clades above Amphibian in the Pokemon world, they branch from it rather than sharing a root. That's also why I can't have Golem as an ancestor of Squirtle for the reptile group. It would have been absolutely perfect to say reptiles derived from them. I technically could have done that in a way. It would have been an absolute mess to try to draw, but that's not what I went with. So I can't have the reptiles be connected to the others while having Golem being an ancestor to Squirtle and then Squirtle being the most ancient of all reptiles, I guess. Because that would mean, because of the egg laying here, I'd have two roots going to the same taxa, and you can't do that. Speaking of which, we are now on the reptiles. This is a really fantastically diverse group of Pokemon. What's cool about this one is everything is pretty much related to the extent that they are shown in the TV show. The only exception to that really is Dragonite and Aerodactyl. They're in the Charmander group. Now the snake type, they are most closely related to the Lapras type, and that may seem a little odd, but that is actually the same way it worked here on Earth. The Mosasaurs, which are the crocodile type looking aquatic reptiles that were alive during the dinosaur era, well, they have the 4 oversized flippers, just like what we see here, and they actually are most closely related to snakes as well on Earth. So it happened that way in Pokemon world as well. The bird group, there really isn't anything I can say about it that's interesting. All of these birds are closely related to each other. Then we have the aquatic duck-like birds. That's their own separate group. The ostrich-like birds over here. As far as the legendary birds, we have no explanation for how they got their elemental powers. Now, the mammal group by far is the biggest group. So I've inserted orders for the mammal group, and we begin with the rodent group. Pretty simple. Oh, I forgot to mention this earlier. Egg laying apparently has evolved independently in the Pokemon world because I said plants lay eggs, but then I said Chansey is the missing link from higher order animals and then the amphibians. So that means the geoderms weren't laying eggs. Independent evolution is a thing that happens. Get over it. Anyways, I don't have a name for these mammals, but they are the armored mammals. I looked up what the name for the order that armadillos belong to is, and I didn't know how to pronounce it, so there we go. I'm going to go ahead and say that Slowpoke, and I think his name's Slowbro, but I don't actually remember. I'm calling them marsupials. Kangaskhan is a marsupial. That one's pretty obvious. These two, I don't know. To me, that's what they look like. So the reason is because I say so. These are the carnivora. Now on Earth, the carnivores, That would include everything from dogs and cats, but also bears and seals, or what we call pinnipeds, and a few others. So we have the dog-like Pokemon, we have the cat-like Pokemon, we have the couple of seals, they're carnivores, and that's it. I didn't really know what to do with Clefairy and Jigglypuff, but I decided that they belong in the primate group. Again, I could have invented my own categories, but I didn't know how to. So yeah, Jigglypuff and Hitmonchan and Primeape and Mr. Mime and Billie Eilish, these are all primates. We have whatever the hell these things are. I couldn't think of a name. They're kind of similar to the primates, so that maybe they're like the most closely related, but I don't know what the hell to call them. Here we have the ungulates. In real life, horses and bovines and tapirs, they are ungulates. Now, I think Drowsy and Hypno, is that his name? I think one's an evolution of the other, but I had to split them, and I've done that with many others, so you can't complain. Diglett and Dugtrio, they are, I guess, moles. That's what I'm choosing to call them. Then the final one are two bats. The only two we have are Zubat and Golbat. Bats are actually, on Earth, bats are fantastically diverse. They're the second biggest group of mammals after rodents. And that's all of them. If there are any inconsistencies, feel free to point it out. Again, it's not a one-to-one correspondence with Earth, but it is possible that I did contradict the evolutionary narrative somewhere in here. If you find anything, feel free to point it out. Hopefully you thought that was kind of fun, and you'll see me tomorrow.